gentlemen.
Hey.
This is a very big film. What were your first impressions walking onto these sets?
They're big.
Yeah. Were you familiar with these stories at all? With the Mortal Engine stories or series?
Not prior to reading the script, but obviously by the time we were on set, we were familiar with them. But the first I'd heard of them. I'd heard they were actually very, very popular books, but I hadn't read them, and so my first introduction was reading the script. Yeah. And it was absolutely wonderful. So I enjoyed that read enormously, and then went back and started.
This is another big franchise film for you. You've done these big franchise films, and you've worked with Jackson and his team. What's it like being isolated over here in Wellington or wherever you are in New Zealand to work on these films with in such a condensed, closed-off area from the rest of society? Is that a positive, or is it?
Yeah, I mean Wellington. One of the great things about being in New Zealand is kind of that you are on an island or two islands, like, you know, in a part of the world that seems very distant from everywhere else. Of course, when you're there, it's the center of the universe.
Yeah,
and there's a certain there's a sense of, well, there's very unique cultures there, and they're very creative people, very welcoming, very can-do, very, very experimental as well. So it's always a great pleasure to be there.
That's awesome. What was it like seeing your completed character on the screen? Were you involved with the process of developing Shrike?
Yes, the process of developing Shrike was very collaborative. Of course, when I first got to the set, I was beginning my work, and part of the beginnings of my work has to do with looking at the work that's already been done, the character renderings by people who've been thinking about this and sketching this and sculpting this well before I came on the scene. And then the task, I think, for all of us involved in the creation of this role is one of dialogue and collaboration, where we all know we're working towards the same objective, which is to make the most complete, alluring, frightening, terrifying, deeply felt character that we possibly can. And you know, the folks at Weta, they're old hand at this, so I had I didn't come into this with any wariness or any trepidation at all, because I know that their brief has always been to take the work that the actor does and to articulate it as honestly and authentically as they can.
So with a big epic story like this, there's a lot of comparisons to, even though this story was, they started making this 10 years ago, people want to compare the dynamic of this film to what's happening in the world today. What do you have? Do you address that at all? What's your takeaway on that?
Of course, Philip Reeve, who wrote the books in response to the world in which he was living, and he wrote them for young adults to somehow express what their fears or what their hopes might be within this landscape. So I think any science fiction or fantasy world or any post-apocalyptic world that's created by writers necessarily reflects the world in which we live and the worries that we have about the world in which we live. It has to.